The third speaker is in the international NGO category. It's going to be a statement by Michael Mwanga, the Disability Inclusion Advisor for the CBN lead in Kenya. Through video.
Thank you very much. CBM is joining the Global Business and Disability Network, and we are sure that we can equally benefit from as well as contribute to this powerful network. As an organization that was founded over 100 years ago, and that envisions a world in which all persons with disabilities enjoy their human rights and achieve their full potential, we have gained a lot of experience in disability inclusion in our organization and in our program work over the years. In our work, which is today conducted in over 30 countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, we reach women, men, girls, and boys with disabilities from all disability types, as well as underrepresented groups, such as persons with learning disabilities or persons with disabilities from ethnic minorities. We encourage diversity, change of mindset, and those persons most affected by discrimination to lead as agents of change. CBM's work is implemented in partnership with local partner organizations, among them organizations of persons with disabilities, and is committed to supporting persons with disabilities to break the vicious cycle of poverty, disability, and exclusion, and to realize their rights as enshrined in the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We build on leaving no one behind as a central and transformative promise of the 2030 Agenda and apply a rights-based and twin-track approach. CBM, therefore, addresses change at an individual level, but equally challenges systemic discrimination by strengthening inclusive systems and services, and by supporting voice of persons with disabilities. Throughout the organization, we assert a strong commitment to inclusive employment with alignment of CBM's human resources practice, recruitment standards, and other human resource processes. We are building on our worldwide work, delivering accessible and inclusive development interventions at the program level. Joining the ILO Global Business and Disability Network will enrich our work and to promote the inclusion of more people with disabilities in workplaces. It would also give us the opportunity to ensure the persons with disabilities from the Global South are represented in this network. Besides, we believe that the wealth of knowledge, your network of multinational and national businesses and disability networks will increase our learning and result in more persons with disabilities securing decent work to break out the disability poverty cycle. Thank you very much.
Great to hear what Canada is doing, and thank you, Stefan, for everything in the ILL for putting this together. I think it's very important for us to talk about disability and move the agenda along, and it's exciting to hear everything that's happening. So I am the Commissioner of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, and I'm here on behalf of Mayor Bill de Blasio. And our goal and our mission is to make New York City the most accessible city in the world. I have a slide, first slide up there that says New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, and a panoramic view of the city of New York. And to understand New York, it's a pretty big city. We have 8 million people, over 8 million people that live in the city, and over 930,000 of them are people with disabilities, which is 11% of the population. And this is all within 302 square miles, or 784 kilometers. So it's a pretty condensed area with lots of action going on every day. New York City does have a heartbeat, and we like to ensure that people with disabilities are part of that heartbeat. And along with that, we put together something called Accessible NYC, which looks at the state of persons with disabilities in New York City. And it concentrates on 7 areas. And those areas are: how do we improve our existing transportation system, employment, education, financial empowerment, housing, healthcare, everything the city has to offer, and financial empowerment, if I didn't say that. And it really is our guide to making New York City the most accessible city in the world. And what we realized when we were going through this process, the slide up there that says NYC at Work in an apple, and the slide says created to address 79% jobless rate of New Yorkers with disability. Now, to understand that, that's a pretty large number. If I said that for any other group, there'd be riots in the street. But somehow that's okay for people with disabilities. It's not okay with us, right? We want to be leaders, and we need to change this. And we have the Americans with Disabilities Act that's been around for 30 years. You think we'd be able to tackle this problem? No, we haven't. Actually, it's more people are unemployed now than it was 30 years ago. Big problem. So we have to address this. So of that 79%, there's over 441,000 people that are 18 to 64 that are in the job market. So, and that's 79% of that number are people that are not employed. So really a problem. And why did we create this? Of course, because we need to address the rate, but address that 79%. But this is the first public-private partnership for employment for New Yorkers with disabilities. And the thing about it is business-led and business-driven. In the past, it would be service providers sitting around a room complaining that they didn't have employment opportunities. Why? Well, because the businesses weren't in the room. And that's important, to make sure the businesses are there. Finding out what businesses, why they aren't hiring. And we asked them why they haven't hired, and they told us, we can't find the talent, HR stops us at the door, we don't know how to provide for reasonable accommodation, and when we do hire a person with a disability, we're not sure exactly how to advance them. So we designed this to build partnerships and expand coalitions, and we created a centralized pipeline of talented candidates to meaningful jobs with living wage and real benefits, and consistent jobs as well, across the 5 boroughs of New York City. So I talked about a little bit about the businesses that we have, and there's a slide up there now that says Champions of Change, and it talks about Business Development Council. In the center is the apple that says NYC at Work, and all the businesses that we've engaged throughout our time with NYC at Work. And they're big businesses from City with an I to JetBlue to Uniqlo, along with a lot of college and universities, because we need to find the talent pipeline from there as well. And the city universities throughout New York City that we deal with, public and private. Now, that's one way that we're tackling the private side, but really it is about the public side and what we're doing. The mayor of New York City says that the people that work for the city should look like the city. And I take that literally. And we have to make sure that people with disabilities are engaged in the process. So there, the slide up there now says most New York City jobs require candidates to take a civil service exam. And it's called the 55A program. And there's a picture of a wheelchair, a person with a hearing aid, 55A program, and a person with a service animal. So what is this, right? 55A program was established in the 1970s. And this program allowed for over 700 positions, and people with disabilities did not have to take a civil service test, which qualifies a person for a job in New York City. So this circumvents the process. In the past, it was about people with disabilities, and there wasn't a high expectation back then. And that they were low-level jobs. So we wanted to look at this program differently. So we did take a look at it. And there was a process to it. And right now, I'm showing it's a 55A process, and it's old, and it has some circles on there. And the way that people would apply, they'd have to apply for a job, then they were offered a job, then they had to disclose their disability, then they had to verify their disability, then they had to ask for an accommodation, and about 9 months later, a person hopefully would get a job. And it just didn't work. And it was a barrier. We saw this, and we had the ability with our Department of Citywide Administration to change the way that this service actually looked. And that was really key for us. So the next slide shows the new process. It's a 55A process, new, and it shows a circular way that it works. And the job is posted, they're recruited and vetted, people apply, they're verified, and 9 weeks later, they can get a job, right? 9 months to 9 weeks. That's what we were able to do. Extraordinary in the size of New York City. Why? Because New York City employs 400,000 people. 400,000 people, just the city of New York. Incredible, right? The mayor is saying people that work for the city should look like the city. We have this 55A program with over 700 jobs. We need to employ people with disabilities. It's our obligation. It's what we need to do because there's 11% of the population need to be part of this. And now there are many jobs that are there within the city. And if we listen to what Deputy Minister had to say, there were many jobs in Canada as well. The clerical associates, auto mechanics, investigators, telecommunication managers, public health assistants, test and measurement specialists, FDNY, Fire Department of New York, help desk analysts, mechanical engineers, and there are pictures of people with disabilities on the screen as well, along with everything I just read. And those are great. Now, the great part of what the 55A program allows, remember, people didn't have to take the test. But once they're in these jobs, what we like to do is get them to take a civil service test. And then they get a civil service title that they get pulled off the list. And then the great beauty about that is we recirculate those jobs. And the idea to recirculate those jobs and do that and constantly keeping people in and get them in civil service title is some of the great things that we are doing. And we are a valuable 500 in itself, if we think about that and the number of people with disabilities they employ. And why does it work? It works because we've worked with agencies across the city. We have a commitment. We have a talent pipeline. And just to give you some idea of the way the old 55A process worked, and this is really telling, before we changed everything, in 2016, we hired 4 people off of 55A. In 2017, we hired 4 people off 55A. And once we changed the process, we were able to change it from those 4 people in those 2 years, and in 2018 and 2019, we have 80 people hired, just like that, because of our involvement and understanding that we had a valuable program, it wasn't exercised the right way, and we need to be able to change that and have government take the lead. And we've had everything that's up there now is the numbers. It talks about 25 targeted recruitments over 18-month period. We have 300 people with disabilities employed in 2016 and 2017. We talked about the numbers. And the salary ranges from minimum wage of $15 per hour to $150,000 annually. That's the type of jobs that we're putting forward. We're excited about what's happening. We need to take the lead. We are taking the lead. And I want to thank everybody. And the picture up there now is thank you with a picture of Geneva.
Thank you very much, Victor. Now we are going to pass the word to Dee.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. My name is Deirdre Toomey. I'm Diversity and Inclusion Lead with the Public Appointment Service. I'm delighted to be here this morning on this very important topic. And I really believe that we have a huge opportunity in the public sector to lead the way in some of this area. Just a little bit about the Public Appointment Service and what I'll focus on for the next few minutes. The Public Appointment Service in Ireland is the centralised provider of recruitment, assessment and selection services for the civil service and for many parts of the wider public service. And we also support appointments by ministers to state boards. Typically in any 1 year, we may have up from kind of 80 to 100,000 applications, 15,000 interviews, and 8 to 10,000 appointments. So quite a large number going through, and a huge opportunity to engage with people with disabilities. We very much welcome people with disabilities. We've got a diversity and inclusion team in place relatively recently, but for quite some time we've had a disability champion in place. And that person is a point of contact for people with disabilities who may have queries about accommodations or adjustments during the recruitment process. We're very much building on our work to date. There's quite a lot of work that's been done in the past, but with the new diversity and inclusion team, we really want to build on that work. We're currently developing our first formal diversity and inclusion strategy, which will be very much embedded in our own corporate strategy as well. What I'd like to just talk about today a little bit is what has worked for us in terms of the recruitment of people with disabilities, but also how we can think about overcoming challenges, because there's lots of work still to do and lots of progress to be made. Just before I talk specifically about ourselves, a little bit of context. I always think it's important that we think about in the different public sector contexts, the experience of people with disabilities, the kind of the situation that people are coming from, their identities, the diversity of disabilities, all of those kinds of issues. Also the policy and legislative context, which in some cases in Ireland is strong, but we still have a lot of work to do to strengthen it. And also then keeping an eye on what happens in practice, because policy and legislation are one thing, but practice is another. So I think we need to keep those kind of frames in mind when we go to have a look at this. So in Ireland, just one statistic I have up there for you is from a report from our Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission in 2018 on a publication around the experiences of discrimination for a number of groups, including disability. And they found that persons with disabilities were more than twice as likely as those without a disability to experience discrimination in all areas, including at work and in recruitment. So some stark statistics, and I could talk to you a lot about some of that, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of that over the last day or two as well. But we also have some very good legislation in place, notwithstanding that we have some work to do. So we have things like a duty on public bodies around equality and human rights, to assess, address and report on their progress in terms of their engagement with service users and with staff as well. So that's a relatively new public duty and a useful one. We have equality law, human rights law, we have equality legislation, which includes disability and provides for reasonable accommodation as well as non-discrimination. We've also recently signed the convention ratified, I should say, the convention on the rights of people with disabilities. We have a Disability Act. We have policies such as the Comprehensive Employment Strategy for People with Disabilities. We still need to formally bring in and implement the Accessibility Website Directive, and we have a target of 3 to 6% employment, 3% currently of employment of people with disabilities in the public sector, but rising to 6%. So lots to work with, but still lots of challenges. And I think our case law shows that those challenges really exist as well. And we've recently had a very interesting case in the Supreme Court where a special needs assistant teacher was looking to return to work after an accident. And the board of the school decided that due to her injuries, she was no longer capable of doing the job that she had been doing. And that was challenged, and our Supreme Court made a very interesting ruling and decision. It's the Nano-Nagel case where they really highlighted the need to think about the importance of making adjustments to work tasks, which was really important. Also really highlighted the importance of consulting with the individual and with their colleagues, and really emphasised, and I think this is a testament to the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the dignity of the individual, and that somebody with a disability was also an individual with dignity. So really interesting judgment from our perspective that can help push some of the boundaries and the definitions of reasonable accommodation in an Irish context. So what does all that mean for us in the Public Appointment Service? We have a very strong commitment to people with disabilities and have had over the years. Just some examples of the areas that we consider is, one really important one is ourselves as an employer. And we are a recruiter, but we're also an employer. And we have been recently working with the Houses of the Oireachtas Service, which is our government parliament, who have taken a really innovative initiative where they have been running a training program, a 9-month training program for people with intellectual disabilities. And they got sanction and approval to recruit some permanent jobs in the public service for the graduates of what they were calling the OWL program, the Oireachtas Work Learning Program. And we're partnering with them. We supported the recruitment process of those graduates of the OWL program, and we're currently employing 2 candidates ourselves, and the Oireachtas or the Parliament is employing 4. So that's a really interesting initiative, and we're looking at the moment at developing a resource to encourage other public sector employers and to do the same based on the learning that we've had. So that's just one area. I think it's really important that we have recently set up a diversity and inclusion forum internally within our own organisation to tap into staff experience of what some of the issues might be around diversity and inclusion when we're implementing our own systems and processes, our own recruitment systems and processes. And that includes disability. And we've had some really interesting insights from staff that have helped us to begin to look at our recruitment and selection systems and see how we might improve them. And that includes things like how we might improve our messaging around disclosure of disability, how we might improve that system that allows people to request reasonable accommodation and take that right through from recruitment through to being assigned to a post. So some really interesting ideas coming up there. And then, of course, there's our own organisational policies and procedures. So everything from things like our accessibility in the building, mental health, even our fire drill processes. So prompting us to have a look at some of them. And certainly taking on new candidates through the OWL programme that I referred to earlier has really challenged us, I think, to look at some of our internal processes as well and some of our accessibility issues. The other area that we looked at, and I mentioned it, that we focus on is the communication and messaging area. So on our website, we have a social story which explains what will to people what the building will look like and their experience of going through the building before they arrive. We have things like we need to improve the accessibility on our website, I think, but we do have we do try to make it as accessible as possible, but we do need to keep that to keep improving and enhancing that. We also want to relook at some of our messaging around the disclosure of disability and requests for reasonable accommodation and make sure that that messaging is clear at the front end and on our website at the beginning so that people can see it when they actually go onto the website. In terms of our recruitment systems and processes, we give people an opportunity when they apply to disclose a disability. We provide a range of adjustments, and Victor mentioned the whole testing area. So we encourage people to request adjustments at that stage if they need them, and we provide a whole range of adjustments from extra time to JAWS to Braille, a whole some one-to-one if we need it, all of those kinds of things. But of course, that other big question does come up, and it's something that we're hoping to look at in the context of our diversity and inclusion strategy, which is how do we make the actual access to employment more accessible? And of course, that needs to have a conversation about the actual recruitment model that we're following. So really interesting to hear what you're talking about, Victor, in terms of your programs there. The other area that we will be very involved with in the recruitment cycle would be the engagement with other government departments and public bodies when it comes to assigning people who have been through the recruitment process. And there are lots of challenges there. We work very hard to make sure that people are placed. But of course, you come up against attitudes, I suppose the need for more inclusive cultures within among employers, and then sometimes accessibility issues. So we have a real opportunity, I think, in our new strategy to really begin to work with our clients. We have lots of examples of good practice, but of course you always come across the areas where improvements need to be made. And a lot of goodwill as well that we can harness, where people are keen and have an appetite to do something more, but maybe need to be talking to others and learning to be able to do that. So lots of opportunities there, I think, that we can work on. But some good stories to tell, I think, as well, in terms of people being placed and being very successfully placed and having opportunities to further their career. The other area that we focus on is data and evidence. When people sign up on our website on publicjobs.ie, we do encourage them to tell us a little bit about their background so that we can collect the data, collect quality data. Of course, there's some work to do to encourage people to do that. So there are data gaps because people don't have to fill that in. We use that data to try and tell us a little bit about the numbers, but we have a lot more work to do in our forthcoming strategy, I think, about really embedding how we analyse and use that data. So it's one thing to collect it, it's another thing to analyse and use it as a measurement of progress. And I think we're very keen to enhance the work that we're doing in that area. Just some other very quick examples. Across our civil service, there's a disability liaison network, which is a very useful network to have. Within the public sector, there are many roles across public sector organisations that have a focus on equality, accessibility and social inclusion. It's really useful and positive to see those roles. And we targeted people in those roles recently as part of our consultation for our diversity and inclusion strategy. We also have a Willing, Able and Mentoring programme that's run by AHEAD, the Association for Higher Education Access and Disability. And that organisation, we work with them to support the recruitment, and they recruit people for a work placement programme, and that's to promote access to the labour market for graduates with disabilities. They engage with both the public and private sector, but about 50% of the people that they would recruit would have a placement in the public sector. And just to give you a sense of some of the numbers there, sorry, excuse me now, just to give you a sense of some of the numbers there, they provided about 400 placements for graduates with disabilities among the public and private sector since 2005. So that's a really important initiative as well. Just finally, to finish up, as I mentioned, we're in the process of developing our diversity and inclusion strategy. What we would really like to see is some strategic change across a number of areas that we've identified. We envisage that change will involve a few different types of actions. They will involve actions in the area of kind of knowledge and disposition. And that's where some of our data and our evidence will be really important to get a sense of what's happening across the public sector. They'll involve actions around systems and processes, and that's very much around us looking internally at our recruitment model and how we can make improvements. And they'll also focus on actions around developing skills and capacity. And up on the slide there, I just have some highlights from those strategic change areas. So the areas that we're looking to focus on are greater knowledge and understanding of the public sector workforce and how it reflects the diversity of Irish society and the communities it serves. So very much a high-level ambition, but we would love to see more data and evidence in that area, breaking down stereotypes, and certainly to play our own part as the Public Appointments Service in contributing to that picture. The other area is very much around workplaces, and we're very aware as the Public Appointment Service that we're like the gateway in the recruitment piece, but that we need to work with our public sector employers on this in this space as well, in terms of engaging and collaborating, in terms of supporting leadership and mindset. And that's, I think, where we can see ourselves very much as an employer trying to work in that space as well. Develop inclusive cultures, storytelling, sharing practices, developing role models. And then finally, a strategic change area that focuses very much on the systems and processes, looking to see how we can make it a better experience for the candidate and enable equality, diversity and inclusion across a number of grounds, but also including people with disabilities. So I hope that's given you a sense of the journey that I think we're on, because I think we've certainly started a journey, and we're passionate about that journey, but we're very much still on the journey, and we're very excited about where that will take us over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dee. So, Amena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I have the pointer, please? Okay, hello everyone. I'm really honored to represent Egypt, and I'm very happy to be amongst distinguished guests. So first of all, I'm representing a country that has a lot of struggles in the past period, and this definitely affects the way we handle disability. So today I'm actually going to tell you a story of how we as youth from university, we found a problem. And I would actually like to quote Yazmine on this part, where actually this problem we saw as an opportunity. And the reason why we started Helm was actually because we believed that everybody should have a role in fixing something that is actually the barriers we put to people with disabilities. So I will be actually reflecting on another point, that actually this is a business conference, and we're talking about how the role of different stakeholders can actually bring the solution come together, and the story of how we did it. I'm going to be definitely focusing on Egypt, but it has a lot of the things I heard today, they so much align with the kind of trouble and the kind of issues that we face all together to make effective workplace solutions come to place and to make effective recruitment. So there is about 13.3% of the Egyptian population. I would probably guess there are more, because the accuracy of the statistics depends on the vicious cycle between poverty and the vicious cycle that we have between poverty and disability. And actually we have 1 in 3 Egyptians who actually live in poverty. So that actually adds up. So the way we see it is there's already a lot of factors that affect inclusive employment, but add to that a lot of struggles and issues that we face in other aspects that definitely affect the way we find solutions. So there are a lot of problems that we shouldn't be attending to that we have to in order to solve this problem. So the number one thing that we do is actually highlighting employment of people with disabilities as an opportunity versus a liability, as a lot of public and private sector would see it, and I would be talking about individuals. So we do have a law that says that 5% quota of any people who work in the public sector, who actually are about 5 million people in Egypt. So if we're talking about 5%, that's a massive number. Nevertheless, there's a lot of underlying problems, and I would like to actually reflect on the private sector as well, because the way we saw it in Egypt is we thought, okay, all the NGOs, all the public sector, they all drove us as Helm to help them recruit people with disabilities. And this is where the failure came in. So we actually had 300 failures in the beginning of our journey about 9 years ago. And that was because we actually thought that the problem was easy, just connect both together, find adequate people with disabilities, and then put them in the right place, whether in public or private workplaces. And then what we discovered is none of these 300 people stayed in their jobs after 6 months. And that was the catastrophe that we were dealing with. We dug deeper. We understood what were the reasons why companies and the public sector would not hire people with disabilities. So basically, we would put in a nutshell, what we do is we try to provide like a one-stop shop, like a full-fledged solution for private and public institutions to help them find the ways to do it. So we're like a laboratory, if you may say. Half of our team are people with disabilities and without. And the model that we work with as Helm is actually very important because it's part of the success that we're aiming to go for. So this is the 360 approach that we actually won with the Zero Project as one of the best innovative practices for employment. So the first thing is to build a foundation for inclusion, then capture and utilize the added value of people with disabilities, and then ask the institutions to join an accessible, inclusive ecosystem. So I'm going to be telling you how we do it. So our team was actually trained by the ILO team on how to create the job analysis report. So the first thing we do is we actually tell them, okay, you want to hire people with disabilities? Let's figure out first what exactly your job entails them to do. So everybody asks us, so what can this job be fitting with? Is it going to fit with this type of disability? So we take them 10 steps back and we try to tell them through our work we've learned that in order to source and recruit, you need to understand your job first before you understand who's going to fit with it. Then we facilitate the employment process. So what we do is we try to help them find the right fit. But that's not enough, because we discovered that in order to do so, there is a missing picture here of a group of our graduates from the SEED program. I don't know why, but basically there's a bunch of great students with different types of disabilities. So we've been working on our academy for quite a long time, for about 8 years. So the first hit was when we did our first training program for Vodafone Egypt. And 56% of the people who graduated from the SEED program actually were hired. And until today, working in Vodafone, some of them are managers now. Some of them are quadriplegic. The first blind person who would work in HR was hired, and she's still there for 3 years. And the reason why this program proved effective is because we understood what are the problems. We did a lot of surveying. We actually took story by story of hirings that we did, and we started understanding what are the real problems that happen in the workplace. For example, somebody who works in HR, his coworker would treat him in a very tough way, and then one of them quits. So why did he quit? Because he thought that he's being tough because he doesn't want to be too empathetic. He doesn't want to seem like it's a person with disability. Something as small as that could actually damage the whole process that we worked for 6 months to hire an effective person. Another great example was with PepsiCo. Unfortunately, there are no stories yet in the government with hiring, and we know that it's a big thing, but there is a strategy behind that, because we were not so far unable to breach the complexity of the problem within the public workplace. So we found a strategy that we're working on, we know could take time. So there is no quick win around it, if you might say. So basically what we did is we're trying to show ambassadors of people with disabilities who are now actually being represented for the first time in the Egyptian parliament. For the first time in the history of Egypt, there are around 8 people with disabilities in the Egyptian parliament representing people with disabilities, as well as a changed law, finally, that is aligned with the UN Convention of Human Rights with people with disabilities, who were actually now issued in 2018. But that's only the beginning, because in order for these policies to be implemented, we need to actually show them how. So this is the role we found very adequate as Helm. So we found that, okay, so now we have the policies. How do we implement it? So we foresaw this problem 8 years ago, and we decided to work very hard in silence to show these models. So when we have a policy, we actually have a pilot that works, and we can come and say, there you go, this is how you implement it. So actually another great program that we do is disability equality training, which is actually also, our team has been trained by the ILO as well as JICA from Japan. So we actually created a hybrid model that actually fits for Egyptians. So basically the ILO program says no people with disabilities are to give this training. The JICA says no people without disabilities should give the disability equality. So we figured out in Egypt, it really depends on the culture of the company. It really depends on the type of people we're targeting. So we actually ask different entities, whether governmental or like the different ministries or governorates or whatever, we ask them to fill in a form and tell us exactly who we're training. So we dig deep before we give the training to tell them to tell our trainers that every single training has to be customized. And this is why it works. We get an 80 to 90% like reviews of positive feedback from our partners. So this is another thing. I think we have a short video of like the kind of also creative trainings, like a lot of people in the room is saying, we need to be creative. So we started innovating. The reason why I started Helm wasn't because I had someone with a disability in the family. It's basically because I went to Germany for a one-day experience. I experienced the experience of being blind in Dialogue in the Dark. And that changed my life. I decided to change my career and go for Helm and start it. So I thought, okay, this changed my life. And this from here, our team with different disabilities actually came up with creative ideas after reflecting on the specific issues that HR directors and HR people who look like the villains in companies because they're the ones who are bringing you people and there you go, deal with it. So we discovered that it's not about an online training where you have to click through it to understand how to deal with people with disabilities versus actually going through the experience. It's like, you know, a picture with 1,000 words. This is the kind of thing that we're doing. We do activities that basically summarizes okay. So they understand in the Hangout in the Dark, for example, that a blind person can use a laptop, how they use a laptop, how they use a phone, how they use Facebook like everybody else. So this is the kind of thing, and how they use Braille and so on. We go through a wheelchair challenge. So creative ideas that, for example, we make people use the wheelchair, experience what it's like. So for example, they're like, oh, it's so hard. So we tell them, okay, it's very hard to go through like a very short distance. Imagine somebody who has to go 3 steps, risk their lives to be carried up the stairs, or actually have the issue of, I have a story in Helm of a guy who actually lived on the 8th floor before he had his car accident. He had to be carried for 5 years every single day to actually go to work. 8 flights of stairs. So, and of course, these are just examples of dozens of trainings that we do that actually proved effective. We actually trained over 6,500 public employees and private sector ones. The other thing that we do is, of course, the accessibility check. So we don't like to reinvent the wheel. This is why events such as today are so important to a growth as Helm, because the trainings that we receive actually, and the models, we studied all the different models around the world. And then we figured out a very simple way. We created an auditing tool for each building, and we basically provide for the public sector, for cities and for companies, the tools that help them understand what are the changes that they need to do in their buildings. So we basically do an audit that looks like on the screen. Basically, it's like a table. Our team assesses around, it's based on the ADA standards as well as the ISO standards, and we customize it depending on the culture and the city that we're in. But basically, it tells them exactly what is right, and it has a green tick. It tells them how they should solve it, and then how much it would cost them to solve this problem based on priorities. So based on the 4 priorities of the, we found that the ADA was the simplest one of them, because basically it tells like the 4 priorities that you would access a building and access the service and so on. So actually we take it a step back, and we try to work with governors and with the public sector and ministries from before the stage that they actually build the building, and of course private sector. So we tell them, if you design it from scratch, you don't actually pay anything extra because you design it right. And if you're in the design review, let us review your work so we can actually tell you what's wrong before you actually start implementing. And of course, these are case studies of examples that we did. Some of them are private sector examples, and of course, we did a lot of public sector ones. So these are like examples from banks. This is one of the career fairs that we brought together with companies and the private sector and the public sector. These are some of the key partners that we work with. You will find that there's a lot of big company names there, like Vodafone and P&G and PwC, and also a lot of governmental entities that we work with in order to make this a success. So let me get closer, very quickly, to give you some of the insights about how we modeled that with the public sector. So instead of going to the government and telling them, why aren't you doing that? We chose a different approach. We kind of learned that this doesn't really work, because if you tell them do this and they don't know how to do it, then you're actually getting nowhere. So what we decided to do is get funding from companies. So here's the role of a really good CSR project, or how marketing of companies can actually support the work of the government. So it's very, you can, after the session, if you'd like, we can share with you a very successful online campaign where it's with click funding. We ask people to share what it means to not have accessibility for people with disabilities and how dangerous it is for their lives. This is an example of the first tactile block on the screen. We implemented the Japanese model after we went for training there. So we actually manufactured and kept testing the tiles in Egypt ourselves, our own inside team. And we started implementing around 2 kilometers around the Cairo University area, which actually has around 250,000 students on campus. And after we did that, we started remodeling. So other governorates, so Alexandria is another governorate in Egypt. The governor called us up and said, okay, I want to pay for that. I want to start doing that on the Corniche, which is the main area. So starting to get the flow happening, we got another call from the from the governor of El Wadi Gidid. And basically he asked to come make his building for his employees accessible so he can hire people with disabilities. On the screen is a picture also of another model that we created in Luxor. So we started finding very attractive sites so that we would show that even the hardest places to make accessible, we can. So Cairo Governorate was the first, and then the second was Luxor. You can find on the screen how there was no passageway inside the Karnak temples. There was no stairs to key areas for tourists. We actually created a Braille manual for people with disabilities, signage, sign language translation to the videos that are being there. So that was only the beginning. And of course, to continue the projects, we also model other models, such as metro stations. Of course, if you want to hire people, great, you can make your building accessible, but if they can't get there, and this is still an epidemic in Egypt, there's a terrible problem with transportation and accessibility. So we worked on creating models that is actually now been promised by the Minister of Transportation to take it mainstream across all the transportation sector as long as we did this. So to wrap up really quickly, I would like to just highlight the importance of education. So yes, we are working on creating models in different sectors, and one of the key ones in the higher education initiative. So with the USAID and Amethyst, as well as with the Ministry of Higher Education, we created a project, a 5-year project. It was actually 3, and that became so successful, now it's 5. Basically, we signed with all the biggest universities, public universities in Egypt, because basically, going back to the main problem, you can't find the good calibers who are ready to work unless you actually produce a mainstream of people with disabilities who can actually fit the jobs we want. So we work on improving the higher education system, still another pilot to do so. We've been working on this. We successfully created the 5 university centers, and we're teaching them how, through the international collaborations and learning models from around the world, of course, specifically from the US, on how we can actually create these successful centers. So I'm sorry I was going really fast, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot of our role, how the business, public, private partnerships, how the role of NGOs can be, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions regarding that. But I'm so happy because I just wanted to show another perspective how NGOs and companies can support the government to actually implement the big dreams that they have to make it accessible, because there is a lot of willingness. They just need to know how. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amena. So now we are going to open the floor for questions. Do we have some questions, so online questions?
Hi, everyone. My name is Djalma. I'm from Brazil. I represent the Business Disability Network in Brazil. I just want to know if you have a legal quota regarding not only the public sector, as she said in Egypt, for example, but also in private sectors.
New York? We don't have a quota for jobs in the U.S. If you're receiving any federal contracts, 7% of your business needs to be accessible, but on the city side, we don't require that. We feel that people should be employing, and we work with our businesses to be able to do that. So there isn't any quota in the city of New York.
But is that a goal or something, or a KPI?
We don't really use quotas. It's something we just don't do. I don't think it's a goal. It isn't something that we've approached, but we are making sure that we hire people with disabilities and business practices across. It's a very different model, and you get a lot of pushback, and advocacy is a little different in the States on some areas with quotas, and some people feel strongly about them, some don't, but they're not applied within New York City.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, my name is Azza Talab. I work with the ILO, with the Department of International Labour Standards. My question concerns the lady from Helm, the Egyptian co-founder of Helm. My question concerns transportation. There is a big problem of transportation in Cairo. So what are the concrete solutions that you actually help, whether private companies or the public sector, to help disabled persons with disabilities reach their workplace? And my second question, you spoke about an example of Pepsi Cola, but I didn't quite understand the example, what you wanted to speak about the recruitment process in Pepsi. So if you could clarify, please.
Okay, so the first question, first of all, thank you for your question. So the first one about people with disabilities transportation. Of course, it's a major issue that we are foreseeing to take a long time to solve. Nevertheless, at least what our strategy is to plan. There are new metro lines that are being created, new transportation methods. So what our plan is to make these concrete. So what you can do is actually, we are opening up the first 2 metro stations. So like I said, we took Cairo University as a model because we can actually measure the number of students inside and get their feedback. So we already did that in partnership with the university, and we're getting the feedback from students inside the university about the kind of problems that they face in that area. So the whole idea of piloting and how it works with us is to show that, yes, we did this. One time it works, what time it doesn't, this time it worked. So basically we did an audit to the metro station and created the accessibility changes of all the station. The idea is for it to be a model of how we can, when we are renovating, so this was the promise that was declared by the Minister of Transportation, is that he is going to make sure that any new built infrastructure for transportation would be built in a way that is accessible. Nevertheless, we are still pushing for more models in order to show in different types of transportation methods other than metro stations and sidewalks and crossings where people would ride the bus. So this is actually being implemented now on the ground in Alexandria. Half of the project is already done. So this, from our model that we're trying to create, will showcase how we can do it. And then, of course, now the law has changed. So now we are pushing for reinforcement of the law by actually creating policies that ensures that this would be mainstream. So that's the whole point, especially with new cities and new areas that they're building. So there is a big readiness because 2018 was announced as a year of disability. The new law was issued in December, and now there is pushing from the members in the parliament to do so. So that's the plan. The other question about PepsiCo, I didn't have a lot of time, so I didn't want to really go into the private sector part, but it was another successful example of how we created 3 batches, and it's basically proving in numbers through one success model of how, when you train people with disabilities and you actually prepare them, not just about technical skills. The training program was basically, we did the job analysis that we were trained by the ILO, and then we did the cross analysis of which jobs would fit with each skill sets, and then we fulfilled that with the training and made sure, and this is the secret sauce that we discovered basically in 9 years, that when it's not about the technical skills versus teaching people with disabilities things that by default they miss because they did not have the full opportunity in the education or in life, in at least in Egypt. So we figured out that when there are certain skills that are missing, when we fulfill them, it reduces the risk of a failure of employment. So actually it's proved successful with 60% versus actually taking 9 months to a year and a half to employ one person without training, and then having the risk of them. So basically what we're trying to do is we're telling you, do all the right steps to make sure that when you do a hiring, they don't leave or they don't get fired for reasons that you will not probably transparently know. Because people with disabilities might not be even the candidates themselves may not be able to explain if they don't have the skill set of communication, presentation, how their capabilities are. So I hope this answers your question.
Go ahead, please. So first of all, thank you very much for so rich interventions. I think it was very, very nice to hear all the different strategies, and this is sometimes something very private as well for a government, especially when it comes to overcoming challenges. So thank you very much. My name is Maria Teresa Lago, and I work for the United Nations Development Program. We started a project to advance the inclusion of persons with disabilities a few years ago, and I'm happy to see that our strategies are somehow aligned, taking into consideration the different contexts that we work in. So UNDP, just to give you a quick overview, is we have offices in over 170 countries. This is a very diverse pool of contexts and challenges as well. But one of the things that I would like to ask the panel, and I'm sure that several of you can share your experiences on this, is how to overcome the challenges on data collection. And I'm very interested in maybe two different areas. First one is how to disclose, how to invite or how to engage with persons with disabilities so they disclose and that they identify themselves with having a disability. Language challenges, how to handle the information, as it was mentioned, this is a big issue, but also how you work around this regarding reasonable accommodation requests. The other question that I had regarding data collection is how do you monitor the impact of the different programs that you have? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start with Dee, and yeah, please.
Thank you for the question, and they're exactly the questions that we're grappling with as well ourselves. But just a few points around I suppose in general around the data collection. I think that it's important that people begin to build trust. And building trust means working slowly maybe, but also being able to communicate back what the progress has been, and for people to understand where the data is going, what's happening to it, how it's being used, and how it's made a difference. One thing in Ireland, I think that's a useful frame around that is our public sector equality and human rights duty, which does ask public bodies or require public bodies to assess and address issues, but also to report on them. So I think that's an important element. Around the engaging people with disabilities to disclose and how to work with reasonable accommodation requests. It's complex. Disclosure again comes down to trust, I think. And also organisations demonstrating that people won't be disadvantaged because of that disclosure. And again, that's about building trust, but also building the capacity of organisations to put in place the reasonable adjustments and to think about them creatively. I think an element of innovation comes into that, and that's certainly where we'd like to be engaging with our clients and employers around what are the barriers, what are understanding from their perspective what their questions might be, what their concerns might be, what the issues might be, and then working collaboratively to find some solutions around that. It is about a mindset, it is about attitude as well, it is about stereotyping. It is very much in that I think came through in our recent judgment, our Supreme Court judgment, about looking at the context in which the reasonable accommodation request is being asked for, and thinking about the job tasks. And one of the things that I forgot to mention in relation to the OWL programme is that a really key important part of that programme is the supported employment aspect, so that there are job coaches available with the support of some disability organisations who are helping the organisations to really break down the work tasks, to look at the work tasks. And that has benefits for the organisation itself as well. It suddenly becomes clearer about the role, what it wants done, how it wants it done, often which are things that are kind of worked on organically in a way. You get generic job descriptions and it all gets defined in the job, depending on who. So actually being a little bit more systematic about some of that has benefits on both sides. So I think there's lots of strategies there, but essentially I think a lot of it comes down to trust, progress, people being clear about where the information is going to, attitude, stereotypes, and the development of inclusive workplaces.
That's all good stuff. But why aren't people with disabilities disclosing? Because they're afraid of getting discriminated against. And if we look at practices of the past, that's exactly what happened. And building that trust, like Deirdre said, I think is really important. And that takes time. And slowly, as Deirdre said as well, and showing where the commitment is, how that actually plays out. Employee resource groups are really good to be able to pull people together. A lot of corporations do that. I would encourage something like that. Reasonable accommodation, it's really not that difficult. It's just not. And there are service providers that would pay for that because they know the benefit of work. And people are scared of the price tag that comes along with that. A lot of corporations now I know are centralizing that so they can take that out of budgets of other people, which seems to work really well. So I would encourage something like that. And tracking, having someone committed to tracking what's happening. We do that through our NYC at Work program, is tracking each person and making sure that there is continuity in their job and making sure that they have all the right supports along the way. And if they're not, what are they? How do we intervene? And being able to set them up for success on every step of the way. So those are important issues that I would like to put forward for you.
Okay, so actually there's another presentation in the evening talking more about how like the updates for laws in Egypt and all of these points, but I would like to give how in Egypt, for example, the Ministry of Social Solidarity created like a smart card in coordination with all the other ministries in order for people with disabilities can get all the benefits and all the provided from all the different ministries and public sector. So that card is actually supposed to help gather data and give like a reason for why people with disabilities should register. Another issue that I know, for example, that exists in Egypt is the part that regarding health. So basically the Ministry of Health and the problem with defining disability and actually bringing people to speak out and say that they have a disability. Another part is awareness about what is disability. So a lot of people don't know that they actually should go and register. And that's very common. Like we've had this situation happen so many times with people who are educated. Yeah, so basically that. And then another thing is Takeful and Karama. So for people who can, or below poverty line, can actually apply for a program where they get money for the card. So basically they actually can apply for the program, and that's another way of gathering data. Yeah.
Okay, I won't repeat what my colleagues have said, but a couple of things that that we're working on, because you really talked about measurement. So two things. Our accommodation passport is really designed to get at that issue of the complexity around the whole workplace accommodation process. Because right now, it's down to the individual manager to both approve and fund it. So it's very complicated and it's very uneven in its application. The passport, the idea is you disclose once and the manager agrees on behalf of the public service, and your adjustments go with you throughout your career, so you don't have to do it again. And you don't have to disclose your diagnosis. That's really, really important. What you are disclosing is what do you need to be successful in the workplace. So that's a really important distinction. In terms of self-identification, as I mentioned, our rates are at about 5.4%. We have an Employment Equity Act that requires us to track how well we're doing in terms of the representation of 4, we call them the designated employment equity groups in Canada. There are 4 that are recognized in law. So we have annual campaigns to encourage people to self-identify. When people come into the public service, they're asked to self-identify, particularly if they need accommodations during the recruitment and onboarding process. But not everybody does. And especially what we're finding is people with invisible disabilities are like, I'm in a wheelchair, so it's kind of obvious. And I will tell people that I disclose, because for one thing, I want to make sure that we have the data. But people with invisible disabilities are afraid, and that can have terrible workplace consequences, because you might be let go for poor performance when what you actually, maybe you're dealing with ADHD and you didn't disclose and you aren't able to complete the work the way it's been expected. And so you get this mismatch. So that's an area that we're really, really focusing on. In terms of what we measure, our employee engagement survey. So we know that the rates for persons with disabilities are much worse on certain key scores. So we're tracking that to see how that's going to change. The representation of people with disabilities, 5% isn't good enough. We know if our population is 22%, we know we have to do better. So we're going to track that. And the other thing we're tracking is promotion rates, because people with disabilities are not well represented in the senior ranks. And so that's the other metric that we're using over the next 5 years is, are we seeing now improvements in terms of where people are in the public service? And, the old adage, what gets measured gets done. So we're being very surgical in what we're measuring to really try and drive change. I think that's another important thing. Don't do like 45 indicators. Pick the top 4 or 5, because that's really going to help you see the change that you're making.
Thank you. We have a last question there, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Donna from the Australian Network on Disability. My question is for Victor. Victor, you talked about providing employment across a range of roles and a range of salaries, from entry-level roles to leadership roles. In Australia, we have a bit of an issue with people in leadership roles. There's a lot of people at entry level or mid-range, but I'm really interested to know how you actually attract and appoint people in those senior roles and what success looks like there.
Very good question. Thank you, Donna. We searched. We have a talent of 1,900 job seekers that have come to us, and we recruit on every level. There are people that we get from colleges. There are people we get from education, and there are a lot of people that report to us that they're looking for jobs. And we start where the jobs are at, and we really look at the jobs. And we have high-level recruitment jobs that are happening throughout the city, and we're looking and recruiting for that. And we look through our resumes. We look for the people that come to us. We work with our service providers. So it's really a lot of different things that we have that come in, but it's taking the resume, looking about who matches that resume, and making sure that they're prepared for the job and not the interview, and setting them up for success. So it's been successful for us, and we've got some people in some leadership roles. And we had this one person who graduated from Columbia University, the top of her class, just like everyone else. And everyone in their class went on to great jobs except for her, the only one that didn't get a job. And she was blind. And she went to hundreds of interviews and got nothing. And we saw that she had the talent, and she was a lawyer, and we hired her in a high-level job in our Department of Citywide Administrative Services. It was everyone else's loss, but we saw the talent that was there. We were able to recruit her over to the city side, and now she's doing some great things.
Catherine, please, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will just make a short summary of the main points that I saw from the presentations that seem to be critical to the public service and an inclusive future of work. Originally, I should have had a bit longer time, but what I'll do is I'll make the points, and then during the break, if you think I've missed anything, you can sacrifice some of your coffee time to come and give me your thoughts if you think I missed something. So firstly, I think there's a very special nature of the public service when it comes to the future of work that comes out from the presentations. The public service is, all over the world, a huge employer with an enormous range of jobs. So we can foresee in the future of work there will be
there will also be in the public service a huge range of jobs from every level and every qualification level you can imagine, which offers a massive potential for inclusive recruitment. It's also seen, I heard from the presentations that for the public service, it's really important for the symbolic link between the people and the state, that the people who work from the city should reflect the city or the country in the case of Ireland. So there's a big motivation. Also, the public sector is, in many cases, very traditional and well established, kind of the opposite to a startup. And so could have some outdated, rigid working methods and expectations, could have outdated programs for inclusion or diversity. In any case, you have an established system. You don't have the flexibility you have with a startup situation, but nonetheless, you will still have changes in where the work is done and who does it. And also, of course, public bodies have obligations, including under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to do nothing which conflicts it. So there's an extra level of obligation compared to private. So the keys that I saw to these successful programs that we were presented were in the area of leadership and strategy. Having a strategy, having it owned at the leadership level, assigning teams, roles and responsibilities. These seem to include targets, not necessarily quotas, but targets for what needed to be achieved and reporting. I was very impressed with the level of data and information which the speakers had on the number of people with disabilities in their employment, their salaries, their promotion rates, and the use of staff surveys to find out what the situation of those staff is. So it seems to be very critical. A whole range of adaptations in terms of policy, systems, and tools has been undertaken. Importantly, in human resources, in terms of accessibility and workplace audits, reasonable accommodation and declaration seems to be really important to have good processes in place for this. And I think the reasonable accommodation passport was a very good example, we heard. In terms of culture change, diversity training and skills building, but also in the fields of procurement and IT. Because of course, if your internal working environment and your virtual environment is not accessible, you'll have barriers you find hard to overcome. And then we saw pilot projects in order to enhance the employment of people with disabilities, talent pipelines, internships, mentoring programs, ambassadors, targeted searches were all being used by different public administrations. In terms of the how, there was also a red thread on nothing about us without us, so working directly with employees with disabilities within their councils or employee councils and some kind of systematic engagement, and the importance of partnerships for the public sector, also public-private, but then also for the public sector itself, looking at partnerships with universities, how you draw on the talent pools that are there. And finally, separately, we had references to the legislation in place in the country that's really important as a facilitator. So not just employment discrimination legislation and implementation of that, but also we heard the fact that the obstacles that are still faced in transport, in education and housing create big barriers actually for public service employers as well, because people with disabilities cannot get to work. It's going to be very hard to actually to meet the targets we have for employment. So these were an overview of the sections that I saw activities in. And if you see other things that are missing, I'm here during the break getting ready for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a final announcement?
Thank you. Just maybe, Verónica, if you close, and then I have a couple of announcements.
So thank you very much. I think that this has been a great session, and we, as trade unionists of the public sector, also have a role to play in these measures, in these policies, and we are committed to do it. So thank you very much, and you have the word.
Thank you, everyone. Two quick announcements. First, if you're interested more in this topic, we did a background paper. It's available on the WOVA app, or I can send it to you on email. We're interested in exploring this issue further, so stay tuned. If you have good ideas, come and liaise with me or Stefan or someone else on the team.